Every morning at 4:50, before the streetlights along Route 9 had given up for the night, Dean Mercer let himself in through the back door of the Bluebird Diner with a key that had gone smooth at the edges from 12 years of his palm. He didn't turn on the big lights right away. He liked the quiet that came before the griddle warmed, before the coffee urns started their slow gurgle, before the day asked anything of him. He stood there in the dark with the smell of last night's fryer oil and bleach, and he let himself have exactly 1 minute where nobody needed him. Then he flipped the switches and the minute was over. He cooked the same things in the same order, bacon laid down in rows like he was paying respects to it. Eggs cracked one-handed, a habit his late wife used to tease him about, said he cracked eggs like he was showing off for somebody. There was nobody to show off for now. The first regulars came in around 6, the road crew in the early shift from the plastics plant, and Dean fed them without ever quite looking up, because if he looked up too long he started doing math, and the math was always bad. He was 38 years old and he had 2 children and $41 in his checking account, and it was the 11th of the month. The kids came with him on the days he couldn't work it any other way. Mabel was 7 and Charlie was 5, and the Bluebird had a corner booth back by the restrooms that nobody wanted because the heater rattled and the window looked out on the dumpsters. That was their booth. Dean had a milk crate of crayons and coloring books and a deck of cards back there, and the kids knew the rules. Stay in the booth, use your inside voice, Dad's working, I love you, I'll check on you. Mabel was old enough now to half believe she was in charge, which meant she bossed Charlie, and Charlie cried and Dean would have to come out from behind the line with a spatula still in his hand and crouch down and remind them, gently, that they were a team. Just the 3 of them. A team. He hated bringing them. He hated it the way you hate the only thing keeping you alive. The sitter had quit in March because Dean was 2 weeks behind paying her, and after that there hadn't been a sitter, there'd just been a schedule held together with apologies and coffee and the kindness of Dot, who'd been waiting tables at the Bluebird since before Dean was born and who would slip the kids a plate of dollar pancakes and write it off as a mistake on a ticket. Taped inside Dean's locker in the back, where he kept his apron and his off-brand sneakers, there was a drawing. Mabel had made it the week after the funeral. It was 4 stick figures, a tall one, a medium one, a small one, and one off to the side that was bigger than all of them and colored entirely in yellow. Mabel had said the yellow one was Mom, that she was the son now. Dean looked at that drawing every morning before he tied his apron, and most mornings he was fine, and some mornings he was not, and either way he tied the apron and walked out to the line. That was the thing nobody told you about losing somebody. It wasn't that the world stopped, it was that the world absolutely refused to. The rent came due. The kids got hungry 3 times a day plus snacks. The car needed an alignment it wasn't going to get. The grief didn't get to be a season you moved through. It got crammed into the cracks between shifts, swallowed standing up at the prep sink, mourned in 1-minute increments in a dark kitchen at 4:50 in the morning. Claire had been dead 14 months. Some days it felt like 14 years. Some days it felt like she'd just stepped out to the car. Sheep and a nurse. That was the part that still didn't sit right with anybody who heard it. A nurse, 34 years old, healthy, ran 5Ks for fun, and the headaches turned out to be the kind of thing you don't walk away from. 4 months from the first headache to the last breath, they'd burned through the small savings, then the not small savings, then everything else, and at the end of it, Dean had 2 little girls and 1 little boy's worth of medical bills and a casserole dish problem, because for a while there the whole town brought casseroles dish. And then the casseroles stopped, the way they do, and it was just him and the kids and the quiet. The reason he was telling himself the math every morning was an envelope. It had come the first week of the month, and it was from the property management company that owned their apartment, and it was the second one. The first one had been a notice. This one used the word eviction and a date, and Dean had read it twice in the parking lot and then folded it into quarters and put it in the inside pocket of his coat, where it sat against his chest all day like a second, colder heart. He had until the 24th. Beta. There was a woman who came in every day at 7:40. Dean noticed her the way you notice the furniture of a place you've worked too long, not really, and then suddenly all at once. She was old, maybe 75, with hair the soft gray of dishwater and a brown coat she wore even when it warmed up. She sat at the counter, 3rd stool from the register, and she ordered the same thing, 2 eggs over medium, dry wheat toast, coffee. She ticked on a card and she always wrote "Thank you, Ruth" on the receipt in a looping hand, like the receipt was a letter and she was signing off. Ruth Caldwell. Dot knew her a little. Said she'd lost her husband a few years back, lived alone in one of the brick ranch houses over on Sycamore, didn't have anybody close. Came to the Bluebird, Dot figured, mostly so she'd have somebody to say good morning to. For weeks, Ruth was just the over medium at the counter. And then one Tuesday in the second week of the month, the math day, Charlie had a meltdown over a broken blue crayon, the specific blue, the only acceptable blue, and Dean was in the weeds with a six-top of plant workers, and Mabel was trying to manage it and making it worse. And the whole corner of the diner was coming apart while Dean stood trapped behind the line with 3 tickets going cold. It was Ruth who got up. She moved slow, one hand on the counter, but she made her way back to the corner booth, and she sat down on the edge of the bench across from the kids like it was the most natural thing in the world. Dean saw it from the line and his stomach dropped, because you don't let strangers near your kids, you don't. That's rule 1 of the whole operation, and he was already untying his apron when he saw Charlie stop crying. Ruth had taken a pen out of her purse, an ordinary ballpoint, and she was showing Charlie that if you pressed hard enough, almost any pen could be a blue crayon, sort of, in a pinch. And look, she drew a small blue dog on the corner of Charlie's coloring book, and Charlie was watching her hand like it was performing a magic trick, which to a 5-year-old it was. Dean came out anyway, he couldn't not. He crouched at the end of the booth and said, "Sorry, ma'am." They get, sorry. I've got it, and he was reaching for Charlie, and Ruth looked at him with eyes that were a very faded blue and she said, "He's all right, we're just drawing dogs." And then, quieter, just to Dean, "You got your hands full, son." Son. She called him son, this woman he'd served 2 eggs to for a year and never once spoken a sentence to. It landed somewhere under his ribs and he didn't have time to figure out where, because table 6 wanted their check, so he said thank you, and he went back to the line. And when he glanced over a minute later, Ruth was back on her stool and Mabel was already asking Dot when the nice lady was coming back. She came back, of course she came back. She came back every day at 7:40, but now there was a thread between her stool and the corner booth, and over the next couple of weeks it pulled taut and then it held. Mabel started saving things to show her, a loose tooth, a spelling test with a sticker, a leaf she thought was a good leaf. Charlie called her the dog lady and meant it as the highest honor he had. Ruth would finish her eggs and then take her coffee back to the corner booth and sit with the kids for 20 minutes, half an hour, and Dean would catch the sound of Mabel reading aloud to her, stumbling over the hard words, Ruth saying, "Take your time, honey," the words not going anywhere. Dean didn't know what to do with it, he'd gotten so used to refusing things. You learn to, when you're the kind of broke he was, you learn to wave off the second pancake, the offered ride, the let me get that, because every kindness is a debt, and you already can't pay the ones you've got. But this one didn't seem to want anything. Ruth never asked him a single question about himself. She never said where's their mother. She just showed up and was old and steady and let 2 motherless kids talk her ear off about leaves. Beta. The 24th got closer the way a thing you can't afford to look at gets closer, which is to say it got closer faster. On the 19th, Dean's car wouldn't start in the Bluebird lot after his shift, and a guy from the plant jumped it for him, and Dean sat behind the wheel afterward and put his forehead on the top of it and breathed for a while. The kids were buckled in the back. Mabel said, "Dad, are we okay?" And she said it in a voice that was too even, too grown, a 7-year-old's careful imitation of calm, and Dean lifted his head and said, "Yeah, baby, we're okay. We're a team, remember?" And he hated himself a little for how easily the lie came now, how worn smooth it had gotten, like the backdoor key. The truth was he'd made a decision, sitting in that car. He was going to call his cousin in Dayton. There was a couch. The kids would have to change schools. Mabel had a best friend named Priya and a teacher she loved in a reading group she was finally catching up to, and Charlie had just learned to write his name, the C backward but the rest of it right. And Dean was going to put all of it in the back of a borrowed truck and drive it 2 hours north to a couch in Dayton because $41 and a cook's wage was not going to beat the word eviction and a date. He didn't tell anybody, not Dot, not the kids, definitely not Ruth. What was there to say? "Thanks for the dog drawings, we're moving to a couch." He just kept cooking the bacon in rows. But kids don't keep secrets, not the real ones, because the real ones leak out the sides of them. On the 22nd, while Dean was on the line, Mabel told Ruth. He didn't hear it happen. He found out about it the way he found out about most things lately, afterward, from the wreckage. He came around the corner to check on them between rushes and Mabel was crying, really crying, the kind she usually saved for nighttime, and Ruth had both her old hands around Mabel's small ones, and Charlie was watching with his lip wobbling because his sister was sad and he didn't know why. And Mabel looked up at Dean and said, through the tears, "Are we really gonna live on a couch?" "I don't want to live on a couch. I don't want to leave Priya." Dean's whole body went cold. He looked at Ruth. He didn't mean for it to come out the way it did, but it came out hard, scared, which in a man who's that tired sounds a lot like angry. "I don't know what she told you, but it's our business." with respect. It's family business. And Ruth didn't flinch, and she didn't apologize, and she didn't get up and leave the way a person should. She just looked at him with those faded eyes and she said, very quietly, so the kids wouldn't catch it, "I know it is. I'm not trying to be in it." A pause. "I just don't like to see good people drowning in a town that's got plenty of dry land in it." Dean didn't have an answer for that. He scooped up Charlie, who'd started to wail, and he got Mabel to slide out of the booth, and he told Dot he needed 10 minutes, and he took his kids out the back by the dumpsters and held them in the cold until everybody stopped crying. When he brought them back in, Ruth's stool was empty. There was a receipt on the counter with her coffee paid for and thank you, Ruth in the looping hand, and Dean felt something he couldn't name, something that was 80% relief and 20% a loss he had no right to feel. She'd overstepped. That's what he told himself driving home. She'd overstepped, and it was good she was gone, because the thing he could not afford, more than the rent even, was to start needing somebody again. He'd done that once. He'd built his whole life around needing one specific person, and that person had gotten a headache on a Tuesday, and 4 months later the casseroles came, and he was not going to set himself up to be hollowed out like that twice. He had 2 kids who needed him at full capacity. There wasn't a spare inch of him left to hand to anybody. Beta. She wasn't there the next morning. 7:40 came and the third stool stayed empty, and Dean told himself it didn't matter, and he watched the door anyway every time the chime went, which was a lot, because it was the breakfast rush. By 9 he'd convinced himself she was just done with them, the way the casserole people had gotten done, and that was fine, that was the natural order, and he was sliding hash browns when Dot came back to the line with a strange look and a white envelope in her hand. "That lady," Dot said, "Ruth. She didn't come in, but a fella dropped this off for you. Said she asked him to. Younger guy, said he was her nephew or something." Dot turned the envelope over. On the front, in the looping hand, it said only, Dean. Dean wiped his hands on his apron and didn't take it. He looked at it in Dot's hand like it might be another notice, another date, another cold thing for the inside pocket. The rush was still going. He had 4 tickets up, and he stood there anyway, in the middle of all of it, not reaching for the envelope, because some part of him already understood that whatever was inside was going to ask something of him, and he was so tired of things asking. Then Mabel, who had crept up from the corner booth and was standing at his elbow, said, "Dad, it's got your name on it," like that settled it. Like the only thing a thing with your name on it could possibly be was yours. He took the envelope, he stepped back into the kitchen, past the line, into the little alcove by the lockers where his daughter's yellow sun drawing was taped, and he opened it. There was no money. That was the first thing, and it surprised him how much he'd braced for money, and how the absence of it made his throat tight in a way the presence of it never could have. There was a single piece of paper, folded once, in that same looping hand, and there was a key. The note was short. He read it standing up, the way Ruth had taught him to read the hard words, take your time, the words not going anywhere. It said that Ruth had a son once. His name had been Peter, and he died at 36, 11 years ago now, and he'd been raising a little boy by himself after the boy's mother left, working nights, drowning, too proud to take a thing from anybody, just like you, son. Exactly like you. And nobody had reached out a hand in time. That was the part she underlined, the only underlying part. Nobody reached out a hand in time, and I have spent 11 years wishing somebody had, and being too late to be that somebody for my own boy. The key, she wrote, was to the brick ranch on Sycamore. It had 3 bedrooms and a yard, and it had been empty since her Howard passed, because she'd moved into a smaller place she could keep up. She wasn't selling it. She wasn't renting it. She had no children left to leave it to, and a long time ago she'd decided that when the right family came along, a family that was drowning in sight of dry land, she would simply hand them the key, and let it be the hand that nobody reached out to her boy. "You don't owe me anything," she'd written. "That's the whole point. Nobody ever paid me back for being your mother's son's stranger, and nobody will. You just live in it, and you raise those babies in it, and someday a long time from now you reach your own hand out to somebody drowning, and that's how I get paid. That's the only way any of us ever gets paid." And then, at the very bottom, smaller, like she'd added it after she thought she was done, "Tell Charlie the dog lady says hello. Tell Mabel the words not going anywhere." Dean did not cry the way you might think a man would cry, all at once, like a dam. He cried the way a man cries who hasn't let himself in 14 months, badly, in pieces, with his hand over his mouth so the line wouldn't hear, leaning against the lockers under the drawing of his children's mother colored in as the sun. He cried because of the key, but he cried more because of the part that said you don't owe me anything, because that was the one thing in 14 months that nobody had been able to give him. A kindness with no invoice, a hand with nothing in it but itself. He cried because Ruth had named the thing he was most ashamed of, the pride, the refusing, the casserole dish armor, and instead of being put off by it she had recognized it, because she'd watched it kill her own son. Dot found him there. She didn't say anything. She just took the 4 tickets off the rail and called back to the dining room that the kitchen was backed up. 10 minutes, and she stood in the doorway of the little alcove with her arms crossed, guarding it. The way she'd been quietly guarding Dean and his kids for 14 months with free pancakes written off as mistakes. Beta. He went to the brick ranch on Sycamore that afternoon after his shift, with both kids in the back seat and the key sweating in his hand. It was a real house. That was the thing that kept hitting him as he walked through it. It was just a regular, ordinary, miraculous house. There was a kitchen with yellow tile and a window over the sink that looked out on a backyard with an honest-to-God tree in it, a maple, big enough for a swing. There was a room that Mabel walked into and stood in the middle of and turned all the way around in silence, and then said, in a voice gone very small, Is one of these going to be mine, my own? Because the apartment had been 1 bedroom, and the kids had shared it, and Dean had slept on a pullout in the living room for 14 months and never once mentioned it. Charlie found the maple tree and lost his entire mind. Dean stood in the yellow kitchen while his children ran through the empty rooms of a house that a stranger had given him for nothing, and he took the eviction notice out of the inside pocket of his coat, where it had been sitting against his chest like a cold second heart since the 11th, and he unfolded it, and he read the word eviction one last time, and then he folded it back up and he put it in the kitchen drawer, the empty one by the sink, and he closed the drawer. He'd throw it out eventually. But not yet. He wanted to remember, when he was old, how close it had been. How thin the line is between drowning and dry land, and how the only thing that spans it is somebody else's outstretched arm. Beta. Ruth came to the Bluebird the next morning at 7:40. She climbed onto the 3rd stool from the register like nothing in the world had changed, but she hadn't just handed a line cooked the deed to her dead husband's house wrapped around a confession about her dead son. Dot poured her coffee. Dean made her eggs over medium and dry wheat toast, and he carried the plate out himself, around the counter instead of leaving it under the heat lamp for Dot. He set it down in front of her. He didn't have words. He'd lain awake half the night looking for them and they weren't there, because the words for that don't exist. The language hasn't got a way to say you reattached something inside me that I thought was gone for good. So he didn't try. What he did was this. He pulled out the stool next to hers, the 4th one, which nobody ever sat in either, and he sat down, in the middle of his own shift, with the griddle going and a ticket up, and for 1 minute, the first minute he'd taken in the middle of a workday in 14 months, he just sat next to her, the way you sit next to family. The way the kid sat next to her in the corner booth. And Ruth, who hadn't asked him a single question in over a year, looked at him sideways over her coffee and asked one. They sleeping all right, in the new rooms? Dean's voice came out rough. Mabel won't come out of hers, Charlie won't come down from the tree. Ruth laughed at that, a real one, dry as toast, and she patted the back of his hand once with her old, light, steady hand, and then she went back to her eggs, because some things you don't make into more than they are. He got up after that minute. He had to, there were tickets. But he'd sat down and that was the thing, he'd let himself sit down next to somebody, and the world hadn't ended, and the kids hadn't gone hungry, and nobody had sent a notice. Beta. They moved into the house on Sycamore that weekend. It didn't take long, they didn't have much. Dot came and brought her husband in a truck, and a couple of guys from the plant showed up because word travels in a town like that, and by the afternoon there were curtains in Mabel's window and a rope swing in the maples that Charlie's whole life now revolved around. Ruth came by on Sunday with a casserole. Dean laughed when he saw it on the doorstep, laughed until his eyes watered, because of all the things a casserole, the thing that had meant we're so sorry, we don't know what to say, we'll see you around, the dish that had marked the beginning of the loneliest stretch of his life. But this one didn't mean any of that. This one meant I'll be back Thursday for the dish. This one had a future built into it. She'd written on a piece of masking tape on the lid, in the looping hand, 350 for 40 men. Don't let Charlie near the oven. Ruth. She came every Thursday for the dish after that, and then she came other days, too, because the kids demanded it, because Mabel had a stack of books she was determined to read aloud all the way through, and Charlie had constructed an elaborate ongoing legal case about why he needed a dog, the kind of real one that the dog lady might know about. Ruth held court at the yellow kitchen table the way she used to hold court at the counter, and Dean cooked dinner badly while she fixed it, and somewhere in there, without anybody deciding it, She stopped being the woman from the diner and started being the closest thing his kids had to a grandmother and the closest thing he had in 14 long months to somebody who knew what it was carrying around inside him and stayed anyway. He paid her back the only way she'd let herself be paid. 2 years later, when a young mother named Alma started bringing a baby into the Bluebird at the end of the breakfast rush, ordering nothing, just warming up, counting change at the register and putting half of it back, Dean noticed. He'd learned to notice. He started making one extra plate every morning, the kind written off as a mistake on a ticket, and he set it down in front of her without a word, and when she tried to refuse it, and she did, of course she did, the proud always do, he said the thing Ruth had taught him to say, the thing he'd had to learn, the thing that was the whole point. He said, "You don't owe me anything, that's how it works." And every evening at exactly 5:50, when his shift was done and the streetlights along Route 9 were just coming on, Dean Mercer drove home to a brick ranch on Sycamore with a maple tree in the yard, and his daughter was reading in a room of her own, and his son was upstairs in his own bed, and most nights there was a casserole, and the dog lady was at the kitchen table, and the house was full of the particular noise that a house makes when nobody in it is drowning. He had 2 children and a job in a tree with a swing in it, and the math, finally, the math came out fine. It hadn't taken a fortune to save them. It had taken a stranger at a counter who knew exactly what drowning looked like, because she'd watched it once and gotten there too late, and had spent 11 years with a key in a drawer, waiting for the next person to reach. Sometimes that's the whole of it. Sometimes a life turns on nothing grander than an old woman, 2 eggs over medium, and the courage to hand the key to somebody who never would have asked. I keep coming back to that envelope with his name on it, and the way Dean almost didn't pick it up. That's the part that stays with me. A man can be drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people who'd help if he let them, and still reach for nothing, because somewhere along the way he decided that needing anybody was a kind of failure. I understand it, I've done it myself. But watching Dean nearly let that hand go past him taught me something I won't forget. Pride feels like strength right up until it's the thing standing between you and your own rescue. None of what happened was luck. Look at how it actually went. Ruth didn't hand him a key because the universe owed him one. She handed it to him because for over a year he showed up at 4:50 in the morning and cooked bacon in straight rows and never once cut a corner, even when no one was looking, even when he was empty. That steadiness was the whole reason she trusted him with her dead husband's house. The way you carry yourself when nobody's watching is exactly the thing that decides who's willing to reach for you when everything falls apart. Good character isn't decoration. It's collateral. And Ruth was wise in a way you only get one terrible way. She'd buried her own son Peter, a single father too proud to take a hand, and she'd spent 11 years learning to read drowning from across a diner. That's what real understanding is, not cleverness. The hard-won ability to look at a stranger counting quarters and know precisely what he can't say out loud. She didn't lecture Dean. She didn't fix him. She just knew when to sit down in the corner booth and when to leave a receipt and walk away, and that knowing is its own kind of love. But here's the part people skip. The kindness only mattered because Dean had kept going long enough to receive it. 14 months of grief crammed into 1-minute breaks in a dark kitchen. 2 kids fed 3 times a day plus snacks. An eviction notice against his chest like a cold second heart, and he still tied the apron and walked to the line. If he'd quit, and God knows he had every reason, Ruth's key would have opened a door for a man who wasn't there anymore. Endurance isn't glamorous. Most days it's just refusing to put down the spatula. So I look at Maple reading aloud in a room of her own now, and Charlie up in that maple tree, and I think the whole thing turned on 3 plain things. Be the kind of person worth reaching for. Learn to see the people drowning quietly near you, and don't you dare stop paddling before the hand arrives. That's not a fairy tale. That's just how the math comes out fine in the end.